All right, we're live, and today I'm here with Karen Vanderpool. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, excited to chat. So, just for everyone who's listening in, Karen helped us out a ton this year to get our virtual reality experience kind of decorated and set up, and all the moving parts tested to launch the first ever kind of VR experience for the Control the Room Facilitation Conference. So I was really thrilled to work with you, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great working with you on that too. Lots of fun ideas and a lot of good things coming out of that.
Yeah, the thing I love about those kinds of projects is that it's every year. Like once you do it, then the next year you have something to build on because it's
Right.
common understanding, and you can look at where the tools have grown and see what's new to play with.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see what they keep changing, coming out with, and the new platforms available for that. I think just in the time that we started building that, there were other options that became available. So it's exciting to see where people are going with that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the. It brings me back to the days of like, should I get a should I get a gosh, I've even forgotten the words now, blinking. But let's say it was Blu-ray and it was HD, and it was like, which one should I get? And it's like,
Right.
and but it's even more crazy, right? Because there's so many different platforms coming out. In fact, I think maybe a better comparison was when e-commerce was first hitting in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was like everyone's trying to figure it out, and it's like, what system should I use? Which approaches should I use? And like, what's better here or there? And then it just took a little bit of time to settle down. And now everyone's like, it's all pretty much figured out.
Yeah, lots of things. Everything's changing so fast in the immersive technology world.
Yeah, and it's not only the what you're noticing about how quickly the platforms were evolving and changing, but also you're pointing out how we're just in this kind of turning point in general. And I think with the Oculus being so affordable and so self-contained, and I'm sure other devices will follow suit. Like once someone does it, other people do it because then people know it's possible. And also with the announcements around the metaverse, I think it's just becoming more and more of a household name. And so I'm curious, like what you're noticing when it comes to being in the creator spaces and spending. I think you spend more time there than I do. What are you noticing as far as capacity of those systems, or how frequently people are showing up? Have you seen a shift there inside the actual
I
system?
think, yeah, one of the biggest shifts I've seen is that for so long it was just the same, the same core people who were in building, and really great experience for me because I've gotten to know a lot of people virtually that I've never met in the real world, and perhaps never will, except for events like South by Southwest and other immersive conferences. And so more and more people joining that now. So you see a lot of people coming in, and new owners of the Oculus Quest who are ready to try it out. So that community itself is really growing. But I think also the ability of the applications to have more and more people join is also growing. I know that Horizon started out, and you could only have 4 people in a space, and now potentially, depending on what you add to your world, you could have, like 18 people. So I think a lot of that is changing. I also think people are going to start adding multi-user options to virtual worlds more often now. I think it's becoming a lot easier to do it. So things that were typically you did alone, there will be more options to do it with friends and join friends in those spaces.
I'm really fascinated to see, once there is more and more folks joining kind of critical mass of users, when do they have their like Twitter hashtag moment? Because Twitter didn't invent the hashtag. Community members started doing that, right? And so when you get more and more people in VR, people are going to start using it in interesting ways they then inform the creators to and the platform builders to say, oh, we should follow this trend because it's a way the community is pushing in this direction.
Right. Yeah. And I do think that as people come in at, people who've been inside building aren't necessarily thinking about it in that way. So you have other people join, and it starts to kind of change it, and people realize, oh, I can kind of grab onto this opportunity. And so new ways of promoting the event. And it just becomes much more widespread, and everybody starts to realize the possibilities involved with it.
Yeah, it reminds me of the inventor of Novocaine. He actually went. He died. He spent the last half of his life fighting the fact that people used it for dentistry because he thought it was
Oh,
subpar science. And so, like, the inventor doesn't always know exactly how people will use it. And it'll be really fascinating to see. I think it's important to embrace those creative uses. Like, what do people want to do, and how do we support those things happening? And so I guess the one thing that comes to my mind is something that I ran into. I had someone on the podcast, and they were really focused on this idea of interoperability between the platforms and systems. And that's something I've noticed. Even when you create, like when we created an event in Altspace, we had to create a code, and they had to type in this code. And so, how do they develop better ways of like locating these points
hmm.
in the metaverse, so
Yeah.
that you can hop from place to place easily?
Well, and I think that's a really good point, because, of course, we created the code so that you can limit who's able to access your world. And I think we're starting to see in places like Horizons that, anybody can come in. And so there's a lot of questions of, are these spaces safe? How do you limit accessibility, but then also, allow so that people are able to access it if they should be there, if they're supposed to be there. So a lot of questions that are there better ways? Are there better ways to let people in into virtual worlds, and better ways to limit people who are problems, and banning them from those spaces and worlds?
Gosh, it almost makes me think. I wonder. The question, I guess, shouldn't be if, because I was about to say if, but maybe it should be when will bots start appearing as avatars, right? Because I can't
That's
imagine that
true.
someone couldn't simulate like whatever traffic the headset's sending, and signals that are coming in from the headset, and overwhelm the system, or just be nefarious in some way.
Yeah, interesting point. I'm sure that that's already being addressed at some level for things that, like, that's not something I would just normally think about. But yeah, I'm sure there are people in security already addressing how to keep everybody safe and keep the bots out, and the hackers out.
It reminds me of the early days of the pandemic because we've been using Zoom forever, but once the pandemic hit and accessibility just kind of exploded, or I would just say awareness of the system, and even if they weren't super nefarious, they're not like state actors or anything, but just kids being kids or whatever. You had all the Zoom bombing, and so
Right.
I bet we'll probably see a phase of that in the growth where it's like,
Well,
oh,
I know there's a phase of that going on in Horizons worlds. There have been complaints for a while, and of course, any kid who has access to it, it's not their account that they're using. So somebody's letting them in there. But of course, as it opens up and is available to everybody, that's going to be more and more of a problem. So I'm sure you'll start to see some interesting creations, and policing that has got to be really difficult and challenging.
yeah, it's really interesting too. How do you create? I mean, this is like fundamental facilitation stuff. How do you create a safe place where people aren't going to be abused, where people can come and be vulnerable and do this deep work that we talk about, and also still have accessibility in mind?
Mhm.
Because we don't want to have so much gatekeeping that people don't feel comfortable coming in. But then we also, so that like that's a fun paradox to hold and think about from the design standpoint.
Yeah, and I think even with virtual reality, since it's so new, people are, apprehensive, I guess, a lot of times to join the first time because you don't really know what to expect, what's going to happen when I come in here into this world. And so definitely opportunities to make yourself create those bubbles around yourself to keep yourself safe, and let become accustomed to the virtual space. All sorts of technology that can help in those things. So if we can use the technology appropriately.
It's really interesting that you mentioned the bubbles because I've got someone that's a researcher from the University of Virginia that's going to be appearing on the podcast. I think we're recording in April, and he and some of his fellow researchers were looking into the impacts of social media, and they found some interesting things around these bubbles, that you mentioned. And one thing that stood out as an outlier was Reddit, because Reddit was topical, whereas like all the other platforms were more about like connecting to your friends, which then further reinforced or entrenched these beliefs you already had. Whereas like by definition, Reddit was more diverse because since they're topical, anyone wanting to say anything about that topic could share their perspective, and people could learn. And I wonder, it'll be interesting to see how the metaverse will take shape, right? Will it tend to reinforce these bubbles like Twitter, Facebook, etc., TikTok, etc., or will it be built in a different way?
Yeah, that's really an interesting idea because up until this point, I think people who are in virtual reality have that common interest. So as it becomes more and more widespread and more people have access to headsets, it goes beyond that someone's just interested in virtual reality. Suddenly people are interested in, oh, I can design in virtual reality. I'm not just going to, explore what's been created here. I can actually use it as a tool. And so people start to segment even more in terms of gathering in their groups and the things that interest them most.
That's really interesting from a maturity of technology standpoint, right? Because there's definitely in early days there's a zone where people are there just because they're interested in the nuance of how it works and just that it's new. But at some point the technology fades into the background.
Right.
We pretty much take cars for granted, right? Except for some folks that are like really into it. But look at electric cars, right? A lot of people that own electric cars own them because they're really interested in the fuel economy, or they're really interested in electric cars. But at some point they'll be so ubiquitous that people don't even differentiate. It's just, oh, it's a car.
True. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that definitely applies to the virtual spaces now. It's like you have such a wide genre of places, developing, whether it's a place to just meet your friends or a place to look at art. And so you start to see more and more segregation within that.
So I'm curious, you mentioned South by, and that's a place where you typically might run into some of these folks that you never met before, or that are real virtual reality aficionados. Do you have any plans this year? And like, what's on your mind as far as what's happening there, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I think this year is still kind of a pandemic environment, and I'm starting to definitely see things change with that, and people are more and more comfortable being around people again. So interested to see how that goes. And I know a lot of events with headsets, so kind of interesting to see how people handle that with demos and so forth. Definitely a good market for people like Cleanbox who can sterilize the headsets, clean the headsets.
What is Cleanbot?
So Cleanbox is a tool for, you can put a headset in it and it will sterilize it with the UV. So
nice.
yeah, used a lot in mostly for demoing and conferences, things like that, and medical applications.
I feel like those little, if they still have those things, those little like, I bet this did not survive the pandemic. The ball pits for kids.
Oh yeah.
It probably just got destroyed.
Make a virtual ball pit though.
Oh, nice.
That'd be kind of fun.
Incredible. So yeah, I've noticed the same thing. It's kind of like it was like, oh, they're actually doing it this year. Oh, it's kind of picking up steam. Oh, like I'm hearing more and more things. I think with Austin going to stage 2, and I think it doesn't seem like it'll be as big as some of the prior years, but it seems like they're really going at it, and there's a lot of people. I was telling people that I think it'll be reminiscent of some of the earlier years, like in the early 2000s, 2004 or 5, maybe, as some years I remember, where there was just a ton. It had really matured, where they were attracting some bigger sponsors. The interactive element had really taken root, and but there was so much, like the city was embracing it at such a fundamental level that there were so many things happening as far as private parties and different events all over town. And even if the official sponsors and the official programming is maybe not as much as it was, I think you're going to see a lot of people saying like, I'm doing something this week. I'm going to host a party. I'm going to do a thing. So I think it's going to be quite interesting to see. I haven't seen a ton of VR stuff. It's tons of psychedelic stuff, like microdosing and whatnot. A lot of that, a lot of NFTs. So I think maybe I'll be surprised when as I'm wandering around, what kind of VR stuff I see around. But
yeah, I'm not even sure who all's going to be displaying their products down there this year. I know in the past it's been kind of a wide range, everything from art applications to like a physical therapy, virtual reality applications. So always interested in, of course, it seems like some of the newer ideas are always on display down there. So that's always exciting.
Yeah, for sure. So sometimes it's just a talk too. That's also interesting. And I haven't gone through all the details and whatnot. And I'm supposed to go down on Saturday and judge some of the startup innovation awards. So we'll see if any of them are VR related. I'll have to report back.
That'll be fun.
Excellent. All right. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure chatting this morning, and
enjoyed it.
And hope maybe I'll see you in the metaverse sometime.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.